Welcome everyone to our Packers News live chat. Alongside Pete Doherty, I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers have just one more practice before they have to make their final cuts for the initial 53-man roster come Saturday afternoon. We'll bring you the latest from today's practice, as well as where our heads are at surrounding the wide receivers of the Green Bay Packers going into Saturday. First, before we get to that, I want to remind you, as always, we want to hear from you. If you're over on Facebook, leave us a question, leave us a comment. Pete and I will address some of those toward the end of our discussion today. In seasons past, the Packers have greatly benefited from some of the undrafted free agent wide receivers such as Jake Kumerow, Allen Lazard. They've been able to make a splash with quarterback Aaron Rodgers in specifically preseason games. However, this season without preseason games, it's been more difficult for some of the less experienced players, especially in the wide receivers room, to develop that relationship with Aaron Rodgers. He said it himself yesterday. Pete, how likely is it that the Packers prioritize experience over youth in the wide receivers room in 2020?
It sure seems like, and I think it's probably this way with every team, I think they're going to err on the side of experience more than youth. If you look at the league, generally speaking, going up to this year, a lot of times they'll go the other way and go with the young developmental guy rather than the older guy, thinking he'll get better as the season goes on or thinking a year down the road. But this year, with no preseason and the uncertainty about how good these young guys are, I think some of these guys who would have made rosters in the past are going to end up on the practice squad.
It's been a challenge for everyone, not just some of the less experienced wide receivers, to get acclimated in this training camp without preseason games. One of those names that there are still some question marks around in the wide receivers room is Equanimeous St. Brown. Last season, he missed all of the regular season on IR with an ankle injury. He returned this season fully healthy. However, he has missed a couple of practices last week. He returned finally yesterday. He left practice early yesterday. However, he was present once again for practice today. So presumably now, Pete, he is healthy. Assuming that St. Brown is healthy, Pete, how likely is it that he can make an impact on this offense in 2020?
Yeah, sometime during the season they're going to need him. I'd be a little surprised if it's early. If you look at who's probably ahead of him, you've got Lazard for sure and Valdes-Scantling and probably Kumerow also, just because I just don't remember St. Brown. He's made some catches, he's made some plays, but I don't remember him just jumping off the field like, oh, he's really off to a great start or anything. So then he missed a couple practices, like you said. So he's got to work his way back a little bit. But between injuries, which are inevitable, and what could happen with COVID, which still seems likely it's going to hit at some point during the season at every team. They're going to need him, and we'll find out. We'll get a much better feel for if he can play.
Although St. Brown has been slow to ramp up here in training camp, wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling, another third-year wide receiver, has done essentially the opposite. Quarterback Aaron Rodgers said that he's been most impressed by Valdes-Scantling, by all of the receivers in that room, simply because he's been able to stack consistent practices day after day. Last season and in seasons past, we've seen Valdes-Scantling being used as a deep threat down the field. He averaged 17 yards per reception last season. This season, in preseason, we've seen Marquez Valdes-Scantling being used also as a deep threat in training camp. However, he's also been able to run and have some receptions on intermediate routes as well. Pete, how likely is it that Valdes-Scantling is able to solidify a starting role in this offense in 2020?
If they're three wides, I would think really good. I would guess Lazard will still start ahead of him. But, if you're just going by catches in practice, I haven't tallied them. But if I had to bet in 11 on 11s, I would guess Valdes-Scantling has had more catches than Lazard has. He's kind of had the camp that some of us thought he might have last year, or how he might have played early in the season last year, what we were thinking how he might play. And you're right, it's those intermediate routes. They take a little more refinement than just running deep and catching up to the ball. So I think the Packers have to see those things as a good sign that this guy is just getting a better feel for the pro game and all the details and intricacies that go into an NFL passing game.
This training camp, Valdes-Scantling has impressed. However, last training camp, it was a surprise undrafted free agent. Darius Shepherd was someone who impressed. He made the roster out of training camp. However, the Packers ultimately decided to waive him after a not-so-great performance during the Detroit Lions game, the first Lions game of the regular season last year. Then he ended up on the practice squad and was able to stick with the Packers now through training camp. Pete, what has Shepard's training camp been like so far this year?
A lot like last year's. Probably even a little better. There's a lot to like about him. He gets open, he catches the ball. But you're still talking about, this is a question I have, I'm not sure what others think, but you're talking about a 5'11 guy who is not he's a small receiver who's not super explosive. And so there's always a couple passes each week in practice where, Brian Gutekunst has this basketball team basically as his receiver core, and you see why he likes that, because there'll be a pass along the sidelines or over the middle, and it'll be just out of Shepard's reach, just, skipping off his fingertips or, just an inch off his fingertips. And if he were 6'2" or 3, it's a catch. The catch radius is just smaller. That's just the way it is. It's a big man's game. Gutekunst says that a lot. So I still wonder about that, but he sure looks to me like a guy, the roster spots are really valuable. I don't know that he makes the 53, but you gotta assume he's going to be on the practice squad, because they do know he's a guy they can trust as far as knowing what he's doing, and he does get open in practice and he catches the ball. So I've got to guess that he's going to end up on their practice squad. 16 players on the practice squad this year for the special dispensation because of the coronavirus.
Last season, the Packers elected, after they cut Shepard, to not fill that slot receiver role again. In the offseason, they did not elect to fill that prototypical slot receiver role. They've said in the past that Davante Adams, if need be, can move inside and can fill in at that slot sort of position. However, someone like Darius Shepherd has yet to find a permanent home in this Packers offense over the past season, which brings us into a question here from Misael. Misael asks, why does the front office think that Aaron Rodgers can do everything in the offense and that he doesn't need any wide receivers? He's throwing the ball himself, and he's throwing it to himself, Pete. He is also the wide receivers. No, I understand what Misael is saying. The Packers didn't add much depth to the wide receivers room this offseason, especially after free agent receiver Devin Funchess decided to opt out due to coronavirus concerns. They were really left with returners from last year and a couple of off the street players that they signed as well, like someone like former Canadian Football League wide receiver Reggie Begelton. Now, Pete, you wrote a little bit about this actually over on PackersNews.com pretty recently, thinking about why the Packers elected to draft someone like A.J. Dillon in the second round instead of a wide receiver. Why did the Packers elect to go with someone like Dillon, a running back, in this past year's draft?
Yeah, so I don't dispute the point at all there in the question. They don't have a lot of dynamic talent at receiver. It's still a big weakness in their roster. But their thinking, I'm sure, is they've really not come straight out and said this, but their thinking is that if they go all in with this offense, and the model is kind of the Broncos in the 90s when John Elway got older, and they went with that outside zone scheme. Kyle Shanahan's dad. Kyle Shanahan is LaFleur's mentor. And so I think the thinking is, if they have two really good backs, if Dillon turns out to be a pretty good player, then almost all the time either he or Jones will be on the field, and that will help Rodgers a lot because of the threat of the run and the play-action passing game. And LaFleur has talked to everybody this preseason. You've seen all these Zoom interviews, and what's everybody always saying? Marrying the run game to the pass game. They want it all to look the same. Well, the run game's got to be a real threat to make that work. And with Aaron Jones it was. What was Rodgers' QBR last year? Was 68 when Jones was on the field and 28 when he wasn't. Direct correlation there. So that's their thinking. Now, it's dependent upon LaFleur being a good play caller and master planner of the offense, and it's dependent upon A.J. Dillon that they picked a good player there. Who knows? We'll find out and start finding out in a week and a half here. But I think that's the thinking, is that the run game could help Aaron Rodgers more than a rookie receiver could, and they're going all in with that. But I don't think anybody's going to dispute that they don't have a particularly talented, explosive receiving core.
Dillon, to your point, Pete, if the Packers want to make some plays, pass plays, run plays, start to look similar when they wheel out the same personnel. They don't want opposing defenses to be able to tell what the play is going to be just by the personnel that's out there. Now with A.J. Dillon, they're going to have to get him up to speed in the passing game. It wasn't something that he was really involved in at Boston College, so now the Packers are tasked with getting him up to speed in the passing game.
And DeGuara was part of that too. I mean, when they picked him in the third round, I was sure they were going to take a receiver the second round too, but in the third round I thought, well, it's a given. They're taking a receiver here. And they took basically an H-back, which is a real niche position, but the thinking is the same there. Is it run or pass when this guy's on the field? Is he going to line up at fullback or tight end or somewhere in between? So that's the thinking, is that they can help their quarterback as much, if not more, with the running game and the scheme than they could with adding a rookie receiver. We'll see. They've got 17 weeks, 16 games to prove whether they're right or not.
Marrying the run and the pass, the illusion of complexity, they're phrases that head coach Matt LaFleur loves to use, will continue to use to describe what he aspires his offense to be. Speaking of offense, we've got a question about the offensive front. Let's move over to Jamie. Jamie asks, any talk about tackle Jared Valdir coming back to the Green Bay Packers? Right tackle / guard Billy Turner reportedly sustained a knee injury in Sunday's scrimmage at Lambeau Field. He is going to be out for an unforeseeable amount of time. Several weeks was the report. That means, in theory, that right tackle Rick Wagner would be the starter week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings at right tackle. However, the Packers are quite thin at tackle. Behind Wagner right now, the options are tackles Alex Light, Yosh Nijman, John Leglue. All have limited NFL experience, Alex Light being the actually only player really that's had any in-game experience. How likely is it that the Packers would have any interest in bringing back someone like Jared Valdir?
I'm thinking he's on there. He's got to be on their emergency list, and they may have zero concern about any other team signing him. And he knows their scheme. He was with them last year. So that's my best guess as to what their thinking is. They might feel a little better about Light this year. I thought he looked a little better in camp, just a little stronger. If you get any deeper than him on the depth chart, though, I would be really worried if I were the Packers. And maybe that's if any injuries turn out to be more serious, then maybe we do see Jared Valdir. But the Packers have not commented on that at all, and I don't expect that they will. They'll just, if they feel the need to make the move, they'll just make it.
On yesterday's live stream, Jim Ozarski was my guest. He reported that as of yesterday, the Packers had not been in contact with Valdir about potentially bringing him back on. So things could have changed within 24 hours. However, at the moment, Jared Valdir is still at home waiting for a call from somebody. And because of the nature of this season, given the fact of coronavirus, COVID-19 could have who knows what kind of impact on rosters, my guess is that Jared Valdir could be getting a call from somebody at some point during this season. We'll see. Let's move over to Steve's question. Steve asks, will running back Aaron Jones get less touches this year due to the addition of A.J. Dillon and spreading the ball to the wide receivers, tight ends in the second year of the offense? It's a good question. A.J. Dillon comes into a pretty crowded running backs room. The clear 1-2 tandem last year of Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams they've been splitting reps for a little while now. Interesting to note that they're both going to be free agents in 2021, so perhaps the Packers are looking down the road a little bit with that addition of A.J. Dillon. However, Aaron Jones, how does he fit into this offense, given the fact that they've added a couple new offensive weapons to this scheme?
I mean, he's their best guy, and we saw that last year. He's their most dynamic guy with the ball in his hands. I would think they're still going to want him out there a lot. Now, he only played 60% of the snaps last year. He's got a really worrisome injury history if you're the Packers. 3 MCLs in his first 13 months with the team. So I would think they won't go over that 60% mark with him, because to have him have a really good year but then not have him on the field because of an injury in January really doesn't do you much good when he's your second most important guy on offense. So I would guess he's still going to get his right around 60% of the snaps and the similar amount of touches. They're going to want to keep his touches, under 20, I would think, or 20 at tops. But they brought in Dylan to get him on the field. Now, it might be one of those things where early he's not playing all that much, but by early November, then he's starting to play, 15, 20 snaps a game, something like that.
Not only was Aaron Jones touching the ball quite a bit, he was also lining up as a receiver pretty early on, especially in the first half of the regular season. Toward the second half of the regular season, his reception started to drop a little bit. I'm curious to find out, Pete, are the Packers going to utilize him more in the passing game as a receiver come 2020?
Yeah, he was good at that. It was at Kansas City where they lined up. Up to the Kansas City game, they'd split him out of the backfield. He'd go in motion, go out. In Kansas City, I remember it was a huge third down in the fourth quarter of that game. They had a linebacker on him. He did a quick out, easy pitch and catch, first down. I think that basically kind of clinched the game, if I remember right. I think after that game, teams were putting DBs on him after that. So that's probably why they stopped splitting him out so much, because then their advantage didn't pick up, but then there were probably more DBs on the field to help with the run game. So to get the ball in open space to him is what you're shooting for. So I still would think he's going to see his share of checkdowns and screen passes and whatever ways they can to get the ball to him in the open field. But I don't know if his catch total will be any higher than last year or not.
The game plan, get the ball to Aaron Jones. If that is indeed what the Packers end up doing this season, it's going to be hard to deny that man a contract in 2021. We'll see exactly what they decide to do with Jones as the season progresses. Let's move over to Josh. Josh asks what a question. Question that we've been asking each other for a long time now. Who's going to play middle linebacker? I can give you one answer that I'm fairly certain will be a starter, and that would be inside linebacker Christian Kirksey. However, who is going to be alongside of him when the Packers are in base defense and they have two inside linebackers on the field? To that I say, I don't know, man. I have no idea. Yeah. They've been all training camp battling for that second inside linebacker spot. The competition has been among inside linebackers Oren Burks, Kamal Martin, and Ty Summers. However, recently Kamal Martin had knee surgery, which is going to keep him out. A report said 6 to 8 weeks, which is a substantial amount of time. Mm-hmm. It's good news for the Packers that it is not a season-ending injury. I'm sure they're hoping that they can get him back and bring him back. He would be a candidate if he makes the 53. He would be a candidate to come off of IR at some point during the regular season. Pete, however, if it's not going to be Martin, who starts at that second inside linebacker spot?
I mean, you would have guessed going into camp, well, it's, let's just say Martin's really good and he gets hurt. It's got to be Oren Burks. But after, Burks just did not have a real strong camp. Again, he had his moments, but I really don't know whether they'd go with him or Ty Summers. I'm guessing because of Burks being in his third year and knowing the defense a little better. And has more experience than Summers. I don't know if Summers played any snaps from scrimmage last year. If he did, it was a very, very low number. So I guess I would still, if I just had to guess, go with Burks, but I don't think that's at all a given.
We know that defensive coordinator Mike Pettin likes to use a hybrid safety at that inside linebacker position when the Packers are not in base defense.
Yeah.
My guess is that we'll continue to see a lot of that look with someone like Raven Green at that spot. However,
and maybe more than we would have otherwise.
Right, but Green's injured, so who knows
right.
Raven Green has missed the last at least a week of practices here. He's been out on the field getting some work in, so he's not totally out of service right now. He is still active, moving around. We don't know when he'll be back. However, again, the depth at that position is a little concerning at this point for the Packers. We'll be keeping an eye on that going forward as we get closer to week 1. Let's move to another question here from Josh. Josh says it's Kevin King's last year in Green Bay. Bold statement, however, probably not an inconceivable statement. King is a 2021 free agent, and there's a long list, as we've mentioned in the past, of 2021 free agents that the Packers have to make big decisions about. The headline on that list is left tackle David Bakhtiari. Other marquee names include running back Aaron Jones, We've got center Corey Linsley on that list. Kevin King is on that list. Jamal Williams is on that list. Pete, what does Kevin King have to do this season to prove to the Packers that he's worthy of an extension?
The biggest thing is to play 15, 16 games. The injury history is the big concern there. His first 2 years, he was injured a lot. He was injured a lot at Washington in college. So that'll be the big thing, because when he plays pretty solid football, and he's a long, rangy guy who's really fast for a guy that size. He gets his hands on a lot of passes. So he's a talented guy, no question. I think one of the interesting things will be in a dynamic that none of us knows how it's going to go, is the cap is going to drop quite a bit next year, which is no one has planned for this because no one planned for the coronavirus. The cap keeps going up at least $10 million a year. It has for the last decade. So it's going to affect these free agents too, and I wonder if some of these free agents are going to end up signing one-year deals, maybe even staying with their team for relatively cheap prices so they can hit the market the next year when the cap goes way back up, because these TV contracts are about to be renewed. And if we know anything about this league, when those media contracts get done, the next one is always twice the size of the previous one. So the caps, again, will start skyrocketing. So we don't know how that's going to turn out. And this will affect the Aaron Joneses and the Kevin Kings of the world. Jones because he's a running back and people don't want to pay him. King possibly because of the injury history, and depending on whether he makes it through 16 games this year.
The cap minimum next season is slated to be $175 million. That does not include any sort of rollover that the Packers would have coming out of this season carrying into next season. Not that they honestly have that much leftover cap to begin with in 2020. However, something to keep in mind and to keep an eye on for all of the 2021 free agents going forward is how much money are the Packers really going to have to work with. Let's move over to Justin. Going back to the wide receivers here, Justin wants to know, what's the wide receiver core going to look like? Will Canadian Football League alum Reggie Begelton make the active roster? I asked this question yesterday to Jim Ozarski. I will ask you this, Pete. How many receivers are going to make the initial 53 in 2020?
With the emphasis on tight ends play with the running backs, and you've got Irvin as he's listed as a running back, but he's more of a receiver, actually. So I think of just the pure listed as receiver guys. If I had to bet, I'm guessing this was Jim's answer. I would think they'd keep 5 of them.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent bet. You never know. These teams, they surprise you all the time. You never know for sure what they're thinking. But I think that's a fairly safe bet.
And then going back to the second part of that question, Begelton, how likely is it that he could make the 53? If not the 53, then the 16-man practice squad.
I would think the 53, there's, minimal chance, I would guess. Practice squad, tough. I would think Shepard's ahead of them. And then, I don't know, Taylor, you get to these other guys, it's kind of a coin flip. I'm thinking with 16 spots, will they keep 2 receivers? Wouldn't be surprised if they go a little lighter with 5 on the regular roster. So he might have a shot at that second spot.
Possible, but certainly challenging, Pete, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Someone like Shepard is ahead of him. And then, again, Malik Taylor, who had that experience on the practice squad last year, is familiar with this offense, more familiar than Begelton is. Might be a bit of a challenge for Begelton to crack that 53, especially, and even the 16, without those preseason games this year. All right, we ran through a lot, everyone. That is going to do it for us today. Have no fear. We will be back tomorrow to you'll be asking the questions. We will be providing the answers to any of your questions as it relates to the cutdown. Saturday afternoon, the Packers are going to have to finalize their roster for the beginning of the regular season. Week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings is almost a week away. Make sure you're checking out PackersNews.com for all of your Packers coverage. Also, make sure you're following us on all of our social media accounts to stay in the loop about your